Mr. President, I'm only going to take a moment today and repeat something I do on a regular basis, actually something that I inherited from the former senator from Delaware, Senator Kaufman, when he was here, which said on a fairly regular basis, come down and recognize the great work of individual federal employees. We spend a lot of time in this body, talking about what government doesn't do well and the needs to rein in and get our government in order, and that is true, and I know the presiding officer and I share those beliefs. But there's an awful lot of good folks who work for our federal government day in and day out that don't get much recognition, but provide incredibly valuable service to literally the 300 million Americans. And so, following in Senator Kaufman's footsteps, I come down and we pick a federal employee to recognize, and I'll get to this federal employee in a moment, but let me just say we've already seen rumblings in the press of another potential political brinksmanship around the end of the fiscal year. And I see my good friend, the senator from Maryland, who, like me, a senator from Virginia, we have a disproportionate number of federal employees in our respective states. Actually, the presiding officer from West Virginia probably has a disproportionate amount of federal employees as well at this point. We got to remember, every time we get to that 11th hour, we put all of these federal employees' lives in limbo, and that is not fair. It is not right. Every time we do this, we self-inflict upon this economy another effort imposed by us that slows our economic recovery. So I know the majority leader and others are trying to work in good faith to make sure that we don't have another brinksmanship around the end of the fiscal year.
The gentleman yield just for 1 minute.
I'd be more than happy to yield to my good friend, the senator from Maryland.
Senator from Maryland. Let me thank my colleague from Virginia. He's absolutely right. We went through a pretty tough time just a month ago, and we reached an agreement on the funding levels. This should be a very simple process to get a continuing resolution passed that will extend the government based upon the agreement that was reached just a month ago. And you're right about our federal workforce. Our federal workforce is doing more work with less people. They are subjected to a 2-year pay freeze, which they were subjected to before we had an agreement to deal with the deficit. And for the sake of our federal employees, for the sake of people depend upon our services, for the sake of our economy, and for good governance, the passage of what we call a clean continuing resolution that allows us to work out the individual appropriation bills should be beyond any disagreement. I thank the senator from Virginia for your leadership, not only on behalf of federal employees, but your leadership on behalf of sensible budgeting, so that we don't have to go through this type of ordeal and put people through this unnecessary anxiety.
I thank the senator from Maryland, and with that, let me just take a moment or so again, and in this continuing effort to recognize examples of the kind of people who serve our government, oftentimes, again, for not much recognition, a lot less pay oftentimes, and candidly, oftentimes from people on both sides of the aisle, some disdain. So today, Mr. President, I'm pleased to honor Dr. Alfonso Batres. Dr. Batrice is the Chief Readjustment Counseling Officer at the Veterans Health Administration. He has direct oversight of 300 vet centers, 50 mobile vet centers, and over 1,900 vet center staff providing readjustment services to war zone veterans and their families across the country. Dr. Batres has worked extensively to ensure that the vet centers, which are small storefront operations located throughout the country, are accessible to as many people as possible. His efforts led nearly 200,000 veterans and their families to visit vet centers, a total of 1.2 million times in 2010 alone. Dr. Batres has also expanded the scope of coverage at the vet centers and worked to improve the quality of the services offered to our veterans. For example, he developed family bereavement services in the Combat Call Center, which allows veterans to talk to other combat veterans about readjustment issues they may be experiencing. Dr. Batrice's dedication to providing quality, veteran-centric care has led to praise throughout the healthcare community. According to Lawrence Dayton, a former Veteran Affairs colleague, quote, Dr. Batrice's combination of vision and personal experience has translated into the vet center becoming the gold standard and a model for public health programs. In an interview, Dr. Batrice said, quote, the opportunity to serve veterans and their families as a civil servant through the vet center programs has been a dream realized and an honor. Mr. President, in 2009, when I first joined this body, I helped launch a comprehensive study that evaluated the quality of care and benefits that we are providing to our returning combat veterans, especially women who are affected by post-traumatic stress syndrome and traumatic brain injury. I think we are very fortunate to have someone as dedicated as Dr. Batrice working on these important issues. I hope my colleague will join me in honoring the doctor as well as all those at the Department of Veterans Affairs for their excellent work today. I also proud to recognize that Dr. Batrice, as a Virginian and a Vietnam veteran, has dedicated 37 years to public service. So echoing the comments of my friend, the senator from Maryland, there will be things we disagree with our friends on the other side. We ought to have a way to argue, debate, and decide those disagreements. But let's make sure that we don't put this country, our federal employees, and equally important, the 300 million Americans who not only depend on those services we provide, but mostly are about trying to recover from this economy. Let's not have Act 3 of the kind of political brinksmanship which, starting this spring and then over the debt crisis and now potentially at the end of this month, are in effect self-inflicted wounds upon our economy that is struggling so much to recover. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.